Bonjour, Kinamagian and Ireland Indigenicas, and welcome to this presentation of Social Studies Television. Today's episode, Chapter 3, Section 3, The Establishment of New England. We'll begin here on Google Earth. Grab my annotation tool to kind of highlight where we're at. Let's give a bright yellow today. You can see here is Michigan, where we are. This is Canada. This region right here is what's going to become known as New England. It includes the modern states of Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. These will be the colonies first established after the Jamestown founding, and the first one's going up the coast. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. The climate in this area is going to be a little bit cooler than what they would have dealt with in Virginia. It's obviously there are mountains that are running through here. This is all mountains. So they're largely going to be by the coast. And that allows things like lumbering and fishing to become primary industries. You're not going to have so much in farming. Yes, individuals will grow their own gardens, but we're not growing large-scale crops like tobacco and rice and indigo, like we talked about in the southern colonies. We'll be focusing on reading this text and discussing the questions in the blue boxes. There are links within this page that I may highlight, but you can explore on your own, as some of that information will also be part of tomorrow's lesson. Section 3, the establishment of New England. We're still looking at why did different colonial regions develop, and how did regions impact life in the emerging nation? Our vocabulary, the Pilgrims, also known as the Separatists. They were those who did not want to adhere to the Church of England, which was the state-sponsored religion, whereas the U.S. does not say this is the religion everyone's expected to follow. England wasn't quite the same. And the Mayflower Compact is really kind of the first system of government in New England. It's going to explain what their expectations are. It's a document that is well known, and you'll probably talk more about as we go through even in 8th grade U.S. history. So the first question, how did the Church of England influence the founding of the New England colonies? And we'll begin by reading that and coming back to that question in a moment. Plymouth Colony. The traditions of Thanksgiving and the celebration of thanks can trace its origins to the Pilgrims. Not so fast. Many cultures across Turtle Island, Europe, and likely even in other areas of the globe had harvest festivals. So I'm going to begin by disagreeing with this text that the first Thanksgiving was truly an origin to the Pilgrims. That is something you might want to look more into, but I don't want to make you completely believe that. Maybe that's something we can discuss in our Anishinaabe B'Madzuin class in more detail. Separatists who had left the Church of England had been persecuted for their religious beliefs. Early in the 1600s, many of those that had refused to join the Church of England had moved to Holland, also known as the Netherlands, a neighboring country in Europe. The Separatists were referred to as pilgrims because they traveled for their religious freedom. Unfortunately, in Holland, many Separatists began to worry that their children were taking on too much of the Dutch culture. The decision was made by the group to travel to North America to establish a settlement. The original choice for a settlement was in the area of Virginia. So in 1620, the separatists petitioned the Virginia Company for a charter to build a colony. So how did the Church of England influence the founding of the New England colonies? Well, by being established as the state religion, the separatists did not want to follow their teachings. So they essentially move. And then they didn't like it in Holland. So they decided they're going to move again. And this time they're going to go all the way across the Atlantic and join it here in North America. Next question. By traveling to the Virginia region, how might the need for English culture for their children be encouraged? Well, if you stop and think about it, if you keep your circle to just people that share your culture, it's going to naturally promote that culture. By default, when people are exposed to multiple cultures, you pick the best parts, in your opinion, of each culture, and they become kind of the melting pot of cultures. By midsummer of 1620, a group of settlers, of both separatists and those looking for new opportunities in the New World, planned to set sail with supplies in 2 ships, the Speedwell and the Mayflower. The Speedwell began to leak and turned back, so all of the people and supplies were moved to the remaining ship, the Mayflower, and in September of 1620, it set sail. Next question, how could the decision to take just one ship jeopardize the success of this colony? How could it help? If you think about it, if you have just one ship, you don't have a backup. If it sinks, you're sunk, quite literally. When you have multiple ships, you have some options. The voyage was long, cramped, and difficult. Their plans were changed when the storm blew them north and off course. Land was sighted in November of 1620 in an area that today is in Massachusetts. Because of the time of year, they made a decision to remain in this area instead of continuing south to find the land in Virginia. Before the colonists were allowed to leave the ship, they created and signed an agreement or compact. This document, known as the Mayflower Compact, was meant to prevent disagreements between the separatists and the outsiders who had traveled with them. It had been used as a model document for free people to live together as a community without a supreme leader, such as a king. That was a new idea that would grow throughout the establishment of colonies in North America. And if you follow the Chapter 3 PDF, you may click there and check more of it out. There's a History Channel page about it. So what made the Mayflower Compact such an important document to future groups and communities of people who lived throughout the colonies? Long story short, it was a new idea. Most of England was ruled by monarchs, or AKA kings and queens, and this is a new idea for a little more cooperation. Small groups stepped foot on land and began searching for a spot to establish their new colony. So what would make an area most suitable for settling? And this is going to differ based on cultural and historical knowledge. For many indigenous people that were living in the area, they already knew what they needed to do. For the English, they're going to view everything as how things were in England or Holland. And that can create problems because you're not in the same environment. The Pilgrims first landed on Cape Cod and scouted around. They found deposits of corn seed and took them. They also took some items from native grave sites. That's a no bueno. They left when shot at by local Wampanoag. When they landed in the area later known as Plymouth, it was abandoned because it had been the former site of a Wampanoag village known as Potashek. The members of this village had been wiped out by a disease brought by Europeans. That is why the area appeared abandoned. How might being hundreds of miles away from any other English settlement affect the colony? Well, you're going to develop your own culture. It's going to be distinct from the other English colonies. With only the supplies they had brought and no other settlers in the area, the Plymouth Colony suffered many hardships and illnesses that first winter. When spring arrived, about half of the settlers had died. Spring brought hope to the colony. The first event that offered them hope was the arrival of Samoset, an Abenaki American Indian who spoke English and could communicate with them. He had developed a skill by interacting with English sailors who fished along the coast. The local Wampanoag people were led by a leader named Masowit, who came to the aid of the pilgrims. Living amongst them was Tisquantum, a Pautasek American Indian. The pilgrims called him Squanto. He had been sold into slavery in Spain. Upon escaping, he had traveled to England and spent years living there before returning to his home in North America. The settlers received assistance for him as he shared farming technologies of the Wampanoag with them. He showed them how to fish and plant crops such as squash, beans, and corn. In the autumn of 1621, the pilgrims gathered for their first harvest celebration. The 53 English colonists were joined by 90 Wampanoag men. It was a 3-day event that included feasting. This became known as the First Thanksgiving, although it was not known as the First Thanksgiving at that time. That's more of a PR spin that's added centuries later, much like the entire story of the First Thanksgiving. But I digress. All right, looking on the next page, the Massachusetts Bay Colony. The Puritans obtained a charter in 1629 for the Massachusetts Bay Company, which claimed land in New England. This group had wanted to make changes to the Church of England, angering King James and many leaders of the church. They jailed many of the Puritans. Once the Puritans were released, they chose to leave for New England. In the summer of 1630, a small fleet of 11 ships with about 1,000 passengers arrived in Massachusetts Bay. They had heard about the hardships that the Pilgrims had suffered in Plymouth, so they had brought additional supplies, which included livestock like cows and horses. How would arriving in summer help the colony prepare for winter? Well, simply, there's more time. It's probably still not ideal as you're late in the growing season, but you may be able to grow some things and put a little bit of food away before the winter. Their charter allowed the Puritans to govern themselves. White men who owned property in the colony met and elected their governor, a man by the name of John Winthrop. And this tradition will follow its way into the United States proper when deciding who gets to vote, at least in the initial decades and century. As their leader, Winthrop planned to build a city upon a hill that would show people how God had meant for people to live. You will hear that phrase, city upon a hill, multiple times throughout your life. Politicians in particular really do enjoy that phrase. They named this settlement Boston. Within 10 years, nearly 20,000 colonists occupied the Boston settlement that rested along the shores of the Mystic and Charles Rivers. As the Puritans expanded their population, many economic activities developed in the region. Farming sustained the families in the land, but not on a large scale, due to the rocky soil. Lumber and fishing were important to the economic development and growth of the colony. You can see to the right here an interactive about John Winthrop, and there's a number of facts that if you're interested in reading about. Community decisions were made at town hall meetings, where white male landowners held discussions about matters that affected the whole town. Votes were taken and the majority ruled. This ability to govern themselves would make these colonists independent-minded. Later, they would be among the first to resist acts of Parliament and the English king. Rhode Island. The irony of the Puritans' beliefs were even though they had come to Massachusetts for religious freedom, others who did not practice religion the way the Puritans did were persecuted and expected to leave. So religious freedom for them, not so much for anyone else. One of those who clashed with Puritan leaders was a minister by the name of Roger Williams. In 1631, he arrived in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. His followers were devoted to him as he spoke against Puritan practices. He felt it was wrong to punish people for beliefs that differed from those of the Puritan leaders. By 1635, the leaders, along with Governor Winthrop, had voted to force Williams to leave. In Salem, an area by Narragansett Bay, Williams found safety and assistance from the Narragansett American Indians. Many of Williams' followers left Boston to join Williams in 1636. The local American Indians sold land to Williams, and he created a settlement that he named Providence. The government that was established was agreed upon by the settlers, and they allowed religious freedom. Williams was not the only person to disagree with Puritan leaders. Anne Hutchinson had been holding meetings in her home. She spoke out against Puritan ministers and was tried in 1637. At her trial, she was found guilty. As a result, Hutchinson, her family, and many of those that followed her teachings moved to the Narragansett Bay Area, where they developed a settlement near Providence and Roger Williams. Eventually, the two settlements joined together to become the Rhode Island Colony. Connecticut and New Hampshire. As more and more people began traveling to the northeast region, the need for usable farmland arose. The rocky soil of the New England coast forced settlers to look for better farmland inland. The Connecticut River Valley, just west of Rhode Island, provided that land. The valley has rich soil, and in 1633, Windsor became the first of the permanent English settlements here. Another Puritan minister by the name of Reverend Thomas Hooker began to look for other opportunities to practice religious freedom away from the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Hooker, along with his wife and around 60 followers, walked through the wilderness. They, along with their livestock, arrived at the Connecticut River, where they founded the settlement of Hartford. Other settlements in the area united with Hartford by 1636 to form the Connecticut Colony. The strict Puritan ways forced others to seek relief. Some traveled north of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. In 1623, David Thompson started the first settlement in the northern area. By 1630, settlement was shipping lumber to England. They had moved the settlement to the area that is now Portsmouth, New Hampshire. So how does the name of the settlement, Portsmouth, have any relationship to the economic activity of the area? Well, the first part of that word is port. And a port is a place where you ship things from. And quite often you might hear a mouth to be referring to the area where the river opens up into a larger body of water. So it would literally be a great place to ship things from. A fishing colony was also established in the region when John Mason was granted land in the area. Eventually, by 1679, the King of England united them under a charter as the Royal Colony of New Hampshire. Settlers and American Indian conflicts. In the New England area, the Wampanoag were not the only indigenous people. The Pequot also lived there. Unrest between the Pequot and the settlers led to the Pequot War in 1637. The Pequot village in Mystic, Connecticut was surrounded in a surprise attack. Settlers set fire to the homes, and as hundreds of men, women, and children fled the fires, they were killed. Those who survived the attack were sold into slavery. Sad story. The Pequot had been a very powerful group, but by 1638, they had lost so many people that they admitted defeat and gave away all rights to their lands in the area. They moved to live with other people in the region. This left the areas of present-day New Hampshire, Vermont, and Maine open to the expansion of English settlements. In 1661, Massasoit died. As a leader of the Wampanoag, he had secured peace with the Pilgrims and other English colonists within the region for 40 years. As more and more settlers arrived in the area, the need for land began to cause conflict. These new colonists seized growing stretches of Wampanoag lands. Question here, how would this land grab affect relationships between American Indians and settlers? One, it creates violence. The settlers are more than happy to take up arms against Native Americans and then complain about it when there was retaliation. It starts off a long trend that wipes across the entire continent, where as Europeans came in, they found their way to steal the land either by trickery or by violence. Following his death, Massasoit's son Metacomet became the new leader of the Wampanoag. The English colonial governor called him Philip, and the colonists began to refer to him as King Philip. Metacomet, or King Philip, felt that the taking of Wampanoag land needed to be stopped. He sent a message to other native groups in the area, the Narragansett. He asked for their assistance, but they refused to help. Other groups, though, did join the Wampanoag. In 1675, King Philip's War began. It's one of the bloodiest conflicts ever fought in North America. In their attacks, Metacomet's warriors attacked 52 towns, destroying crops and killing more than 600 settlers. Settlers began to adopt the native way of fighting and retaliated. By hiding in the forest, they launched surprise attacks and burned native villages. By August of 1676, scouts helped to trap Metacomet in a swampy area in Rhode Island. He was killed by American Indians who were assisting the English settlers. With Metacomet dead, the war came to an end. Metacomet's wife and son were among many who were sold into slavery. More than 4,000 Native Americans had lost their lives, and their strength in New England never returned. And we want to keep in mind as we read texts about conflict between Europeans and indigenous people that there's often much more that goes into a story than what's published in 2 paragraphs. So while it discusses the idea they were retaliating against King Philip, you could very much make an argument that that King Philip was retaliating for the theft of their land. At this point, we have reached the conclusion of the reading. You may go now and complete the Google form attached in here for your assessment. If you have any questions, do reach out to us during office hours at 2 p.m. daily, or send an email at mireland@psychchipschool.net. Have a great day. Bamapi.